So, continuing on.
So what now? At this point, we're like in our early 20s. Or you're in your late teens. I'm in my early 20s.
Yeah.
Past that, well, about 99 or so. I don't know. We're not necessarily going. It's more like a Tarantino movie. We're jumping around.
Um, yeah, so I forget exactly what we were saying at the point that we stopped, but we were overall
Well,
sort
we're
of heading
basically
to
diverging.
And a point from a long time ago that I was going to make that I never stopped buying music, even though I had some lean times, and so I have a lot of CDs at this point, and so I'm invested in CDs. As much as I'm invested in physical product, the space considerations are a constant hassle. I've basically outgrown any storage system that I have, and I have a beautiful wall of CDs in my office, but I got more CDs than I can fit on that wall, and which is an argument for digital streaming, blah blah blah, but I don't buy into it entirely. But then trying to find a place for records on top of that, I just don't want to do so. As beautiful as they are, and as great as it is to see vinyl's big comeback, it's just not something that I see myself doing. Just because.
No, I get that. I think it's everybody's preference.
Yeah, and the organization of it, and then the question of, do I rebuy things that I already own on CD? Do I rebuy them on vinyl?
Right, and a lot of the CDs I bought were to replace vinyl. You know what I'm saying? And then.
But that was vinyl that you lost, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and CDs then were the first place. So we talked a little bit earlier about I was finding my way with vinyl. I had some awesome vinyl. I had Peter Gabriel So on vinyl. I think I had Heartbeat City, The Cars on vinyl. I had some good stuff on vinyl, but I also had some stuff that's not bad necessarily. I'm not, if this is your thing, but I had like ZZ Top's Eliminator album.
That's one I want to get on vinyl again.
I had a Jets album. I was really just kind of reaching around anything that sort of caught my ear. I was like, I want to eat it all up, and just as the chips settled, then I was like, okay, you know what? This is the stuff that really kind of moves me. But even that was, so then there was the brief cassette period, where that was the primary format that I bought in, until about 88-ish, when I first bought some CDs, and then by the time I flipped over to CDs, very quickly rebought anything that because I gave Eric all my vinyl, and so I didn't have any vinyl anymore, and then the cassettes, I was so into the mix making, I'm like, I want everything to be digitally sourced, so I can make awesome mixes. And so I rebought all of the stuff that I was still interested in from the cassette days. And then I never
moved more into like bands I'd never heard of that were kind of more or less, but I don't know if that was because of the decline of physical media, because a lot of that stuff that you listened to was kind of at not the very beginning, but I was at the end of my first era where I was buying a lot of music and starting to move into, I wasn't buying it as much and so forth. And I stuck with CDs until Kinsey started getting it, and then we have a friend that we both know that he played records, and I was like, dude, it's kind of neat. It's neat to see the thing go around. It's it's cool to see how it works.
And the ritual is important to you. It's
Yeah.
part of the music appreciation.
I'm gonna make a video called "The Ritual." It's
There
like
you
what
go.
I do when I get a CD or not a CD, a record, and and you've been here when I've done it where before I even put it on the turntable, I pull it out, clean it all up, make sure it's clean, there's nothing on it, and keeping it clean. And one of the things that CDs kind of take care of themselves. I mean, once you got a spot for them,
Yeah.
they're taken care of. But you have to kind of maintain the records, and in doing that, it makes it so I do listen to them all,
And you appreciate them.
and I appreciate them. And that's why I don't have a huge collection necessarily right now. It's not to say over the next 15, 20 years I could end up with a ridiculous amount of records. I don't know. But everything that's here, I listen to. And, at least, even the stuff that is the least popular for me in there, I listen to at least once or twice a year. But I don't get time to sit down and listen, like I've heard on a recent video. Like I spend 2 to 3 hours a day, and I wish I had that. Because I'd probably be a much more chilled out person, more mellow. Yeah, I wouldn't have to get stoned all the time.
And so I'm definitely at the point where it doesn't feel like I get a ridiculous amount of music, but I'm compared to most people, it's a ridiculous amount of music. But I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 CDs. And that's expanding at a rate of generally 60 to 80 titles a year. But even then, sometimes those are replacements. Those are the 30th anniversary remaster of something that I already own. So probably in new titles, somewhere in 60 to 65 new titles a year. Which when you break down and do the math, then that's like more than one a week. Which then that's when it starts to feel like a lot. But I'm already at a tipping point with 1,500 CDs where there's more than you can realistically listen to. Not ever, but certainly not with any frequency
And what did
whatsoever.
didn't you work it out or something that if you spend a certain amount of time, it would take you?
Yeah, well, just on basic numbers. I mean, if you listen to, what would be like a high estimate? 5 albums, if
day.
you listen to 5 albums, that's pretty dedicated. That would be a commitment. 5
Right.
albums a day, and so that is then what 300 days.
So
Yeah.
almost a year.
If you listen to 5 albums a day to listen to everything once.
Yeah, I think between like CDs, cassettes, and LPs, because even though I don't listen to my cassettes, I put them into Discogs. It says I've got like 776 articles of music, so I don't have a ton of stuff. But it's like I said, it ain't the size of the tree, but where you stick it.
And I'm very much a music collector.
You have to like it.
Well, I have to like it, and I have to. So I want. Arguments aside about whether a remaster makes a thing worse or better. Generally speaking, I would say it makes it better. I like the bonus tracks a lot of times. I don't necessarily listen to them over and over, but every so often, some of those bonus tracks become as integral to the album as the original album. But to me, that's a replacement. So I don't have multiple copies of the same album. I don't have. I'm not interested in this particular, here's an album that I love. I'm going to get the Japanese mini LP reissue and stick it right next to my regular copy. If I get the Japanese mini LP reissue. I'm pulling the old one out, and that's my copy.
Right.
And then they can go aftermarket or whatever. I don't tend to do that a lot, but so I have a secondary. So technically, that's another alphabet. We were talking about organization a little bit, but I do have an alphabet of tucked away, replaced. I bought a newer version of this album, and I used to think, and when I around that 86, 87 watershed time period, that I had an eclectic taste in music, but I've since come to realize that it's not really that eclectic. It's pop music. I like the smarter edge of the pop music spectrum. It can be rocky, it can be country influenced. It can have a lot of influences, but I don't listen to country music. But I like Lyle Lovett. But he's kind of poppy. He's got the.
For me, that's Cracker.
Yeah.
I don't. There's some country I can listen to. Johnny Cash, Hank Williams. I'm learning to appreciate Jim Reeves because of Dad.
Okay.
But the one he's got also has Loretta Lynn, and I like Loretta Lynn. But that's about it as far as country. But then there's Cracker. But I like it because it's a rock and
kind of it's rootsy
country
but yeah.
blend, yeah.
Excuse me.
Same thing like with the Refreshments were kind of like that. I have the Refreshments, and they made me think of, but they were more on the rock and roll poppy side than they were on the country side.
And so, but because of that, organizationally, I don't have a need to break down categories. I don't have jazz. Well, I have a couple of jazz records. I don't have nearly enough jazz records that they need their own alphabet.
Right.
And so, I have an A to Z of artists. So I go alphabetically by artist, reverse chronological within the artist, A to Z. I could put singles into that alphabet, but it's more the space consideration that at some point I got to make more space, and so the singles all came out. They became their own alphabet. And then after that, I've got soundtracks alphabetically and various artists alphabetically by title. So the soundtracks are alphabetically by music, by the project title, whether movie, TV show, whatever, or the video game in some cases. And
Now, do you have Queen's Flash Gordon?
yeah,
So do you have that with Queen, or do you have it in the soundtrack?
I have that with Queen. In part because I would put it with Queen anyway, but also in part because I rebought the first time I ever owned Flash Gordon was in a box set.
Oh, wow.
So it was they issued 3 box sets. They were like 5 or 6 albums apiece.
I don't know. You got me that one, and then I
Yeah.
never looked again.
And I got the first 2 of them that ran through the works, I think. Ran through Hot Space of the works. And that's when I got Flash. So, I mean, it's in a box with the other ones. But that is a question all the time. And we've been watching, we've seen some videos, or a video recently about how you organize, your collection. And
I'm pretty much the same as that there. I do put the singles with
the artist.
with the artist. The main difference is I used to do it like you, where if it was a solo artist, I'd base it on their last name. And I was used to doing it that way. And I think I don't know where I heard it from to do it that way. I think I did it that way because I worked at the library. And even though they got the Dewey Decimal System, there's still parts of it you have to do, alphabetically according to the author. And so you did it with the last name, not the first name. It had to do with like the reference cards. Before we had Google, you had to look at a card to figure out where a book was, and you could find it alphabetically and it was done based on the last name. But then I got iTunes, and I was tired of trying to look up stuff on iTunes and going for the last name, and then realizing no, iTunes does it all the first name. So I went and I got all of my CDs and stuff, and when I was digitizing them all into iTunes, I reorganized them so that they're in the same order as what they're on iTunes, and I had to get used to doing it that way. And right about the time that I got used to doing it where it's the first name first, you told me that you can go in there and make it so that it goes off the
Yeah, which is what I do. I made iTunes my bitch. I said, no, you will classify this way. And so that leads to a few tricky ones. And so we had been talking before. I made a list of bands, acts, albums that you could argue over. I think ultimately everybody seems to come down, and I agree on, you should file it wherever you would think to look for it.
Right, and we're two idiots, and we don't know.
Yes.
We're not telling anybody how to do anything. It's just about talking about how we do it, and
And so I will say that my English Beat albums are under E.
Mine are too.
Even though they're the Beat.
And if I got an English pressing and it said the Beat, it would still go under English Beat.
Oh, okay. You wouldn't move everything else to B?
No.
Okay.
Not for one album.
All right. And so some of these maybe you love as acts. Some you may say, well, that would never come up because I would never buy them in the first place. I was just trying to think of different acts that had different aspects of them that would make you stop for a moment, potentially, and say, where would I file this? And so the Superfly soundtrack by Curtis Mayfield. Would you put it under Mayfield? Your current system, you would put it under C if you were doing it by his name.
Right.
Or would you put it in with your soundtracks? So
That
like the Queen Flash Gordon.
I would actually put that under soundtracks. But currently, I don't have any Curtis Mayfield, and that's probably why. Now, if I had a bunch of Curtis Mayfield, then I might say, okay, that album needs to go with the others. Because to me, just the Flash Gordon soundtrack is synonymous with Queen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, but most of the other soundtracks that I have, but I don't think I have any other soundtracks that are necessarily done by one artist. So move these.
So things like that, like the Prince Batman soundtrack, you would put with.
So maybe I would put it under Curtis Mayfield, since does he do the whole soundtrack on that?
I believe so.
If he does every song, then it would fit under Curtis Mayfield. But I'd want to get another album just to kind of solidify that in my mind, my memory.
And
theater.
so, supporting your organizational method, Dave Matthews Band, Alan Parsons Project would be DNA then for you.
Right, but they would have been that way if it would have been the last name, because that's the name of the band.
Is the Dave Matthews Band.
Is
and
the
the
Dave
Alan
Matthews
Parsons
Band.
Project.
But if Dave Matthews put out a solo record where it's not Dave Matthews Band, it's Dave Matthews, it would go under. Well, Dave Matthews, I guess, still. So they could all still be together.
But if you were doing by the last name.
I would separate. Let's say he did 4 solo albums. That's not Dave Matthews Band. Then those would all be separated in order, but chronologically reverse, I guess you said.
Yeah.
Then.
So I would. Personally, I would definitely mix them all in. If he did. Here's Dave Matthews Band. Here's Dave Matthews. Here's the Dave Matthews. Here's the Dave Matthews Band. Here's the Dave Matthews Band. that would all be under M and reverse chronological through the. I wouldn't separate Dave Matthews albums from Dave Matthews Band albums personally.
Yeah.
Mike and
Because you're
Mike and the
heathen.
Mechanics. Mike and the Mechanics. And that, I mean, it's Mike Rutherford, but his name's not in the band, so I don't know that I would put it under R. My question, and the thing that I was thinking about, is how it's not unusual for Beatles fans to put all their Paul McCartney records and George Harrison and Lennon and with the Beatles and not separate them out. And Mike and the Mechanics as a Genesis side project-ish. Would you file it with Genesis or would you file it under Mike and the Mechanics?
Mike and the Mechanics.
I think I would too. But I thought of Genesis as a band that has a lot of, and mostly I wouldn't, because I wouldn't put Peter Gabriel albums or Phil Collins albums
Right.
with Genesis. But it did seem like there was, because at the same time, then the other end of the spectrum is Brian May. The solo albums that he put out felt like side projects. They felt like just, here's a little thing that I did,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I would not have put that with Queen.
No, I
You
I
still put
had
under-
Brian May.
Yeah, so I know you.
So in those days it was under M, but today it would have been under B, and I wouldn't have put
and there
Brian May with Queen.
okay.
Just
That's-
like I wouldn't put Phil Collins with, or Mike and the Mechanics with Genesis.
Because in my mind, there's more of a question there, because it never felt like Brian May had a solo career. He put out some solo albums, but they never felt like, and here's where my heart is, I'm dying to break out. It's just like, here's some stuff that's not Queen stuff
Yeah.
that I
Me and my
that I
friend
made.
Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah. So, Traveling Wilburys. If you were a huge Dylan fan, Traveling Wilburys. So as a supergroup, is it all by itself in the tees, or do you stick it with, if you got a bunch of Dylan or you got a bunch of Roy Orbison records?
No,
Or
goes
is
to the T's.
it's tees, no question.
No
Okay.
question.
Johnny Cougar. If you had Johnny Cougar records. Well, see, you're ruining it all because you go by the Johnny, which never changed. Well, John. But would it be odd to put a Johnny Cougar record under M for John Mellencamp,
Mellencamp.
as his name evolved from Johnny Cougar to John Cougar?
And then do you
Mellencamp
put
to just John
Mellencamp under, because Mellencamp's his real name.
Yeah.
Cougar was his fake name.
Yeah, that was the name that the record company stuck on him that he didn't want.
Right, and then it became, because I remember when it was John Cougar Mellencamp,
Yeah.
and then it became John Mellencamp.
Yeah, finally had enough clout to say, okay, get rid of the fucking Cougar altogether.
Right, right.
I never wanted that.
Right. And so...
So if you had the first record that was under Johnny Cougar,
I would, if I was under the last name, it would go under Mellencamp.
I think so.
Because really that's his... I don't know, but do you put it under C? Because really then it was his... it shows his progression as an artist as well.
Yeah, I think
I guess I'd go under Mellencamp because that's his actual name.
So let me see here. Starship. That went from Jefferson Airplane. So again, you could say, well, I would never have a Starship album, but we're assuming hypothetically, you have Jefferson Airplane albums, you have Jefferson Starship albums, and a Starship album.
I think the Starship would still fall under
J.
Jeff J.
Okay.
Because it's... I know, I think we talked about this before, that Kentner was already gone
Yeah.
by that time anyways. So a lot of the core people was basically just the two artists, right? Grace Slick and technically even Grace Slick wasn't an original member, I don't think,
Oh.
of Jefferson Airplane. I'm not sure.
You'll have to look that up.
I'll have to
and
look
do a
it
little
up.
asterisk.
They have a little thing right here.
Was Grace Slick an original member?
Yes or no, she was.